The Penn State Nittany Lions overcame a halftime deficit and a plethora of injuries to key players to beat the Wisconsin Badgers 28-13. They trailed 7-10 at half, and then Jalen Reed, shortly after halftime, about midway into the third quarter, had a huge interception return as Penn State and Wisconsin were really battling for field position. Penn State was consistently punting well and pinning Wisconsin inside of their own 15, inside of their own 10. Well, Braden Locke threw an interception that gave Penn State a 14-10 lead. Wisconsin was able to immediately march down the field and kick a field goal, but they were still trailing, and at that point, Penn State was able to go on a 7-minute, 35-second drive and just control the game really from that pick six. Penn State was the better team. Penn State, I think, had a good coaching performance, a good showing by James Franklin, Andy Kotelnicki, and Tom Allen in this game. I thought that for Wisconsin, Luke Fickell, Phil Longo, and Mike Tressel called a great game, but Penn State does have the better players, the superior depth. For context, they are a decade in, or more than a decade in, the James Franklin era right now. Penn State is in a season of opportunity, a time for growth, while Wisconsin's only in year two of the Luke Fickell era, and Paul Chryst, I think, left less in the cupboard than most would want to admit. Wisconsin still has to figure out who they are. They still have to adapt. The only reason they're returning to their more traditional style of offense in recent weeks is they still don't have the quarterback and the receivers to run the offense they want to. And the offense they want to run is better than what they have had. It's useful to be physical. In fact, it's key in the Big Ten. And I think Luke Fickell teams are physical. I thought last year's Wisconsin team was physical, but they're not a complete team yet. And you saw that in this game. This was a classic opportunity for Penn State to show that they are a fraud, or for them to be so caught up with trying to beat Ohio State that they ignore the little things, that they ignore a team like Wisconsin. And Wisconsin, therefore, earns their best win ever in the Luke Fickell era, and a top three upset. Their first win over a top three opponent since what? Ohio State in 2010? Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But that's not what happened, because I don't think Penn State's a fraudulent team. I think Wisconsin is a good team, but they're not a great team. And Wisconsin, therefore, they move on to 5-3. Penn State moves on to 7-0. The Nittany Lions have a huge matchup against Ohio State this coming Saturday that I'll talk about later today. But overall, it was a good game. It was competitive. Penn State did not play a perfect game whatsoever, and they have some key injuries that you hope to solve by at least this Saturday so that Penn State can be at full strength. As for Wisconsin, they put up a good fight, and they could easily finish the year with 8 wins or 7 wins. I think they're definitely going bowling. But I want to get to this game, get into the details, the schematics, and also expand upon some of the takeaways that I just gave you, and give you more takeaways, of course. So let's get into that. But before we do so, please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, comment your thoughts on this game, your reaction to the game down in the comments section below, like the video, hit the notification bell, subscribe as I've already said, and also share this video around to other college football fans who love the sport, who are passionate about it, because if they are, well, they'll love this channel. And also join our Discord server down below via the link in the description or in the pinned comment at the top of the comments section. If you want to support the channel monetarily, I encourage you to sign up via my Patreon page as a paid member, or you can purchase merchandise from my merchandise store. And the links to those two sites are, again, in the description or down below in the pinned comment at the top of the comment section. But the things that you can do to help yourself out and the channel out the most are all free. Subscribe, hit the bell, comment, like, share, watch the video all the way through, and join the Discord server. So thank you very much for doing those things. We just hit 20,000 subscribers, and at the end of the regular season, so before the college football playoff, but after conference championship week, I will be doing a massive giveaway to celebrate us hitting 20,000 subscribers. But let's dive in here and talk about some basic statistics, shall we? Penn State, they averaged 6.3 yards per play. Wisconsin only averaged 4.3. This game was not weird in the way that Michigan State was, or in the way that Ohio State Nebraska was, where there were some interesting things that happened in those games. Really, what happened in both of those matchups is that Michigan and Ohio State, the dramatically more talented teams than Michigan State and Nebraska, they won despite a lot of things not going their way that would typically go the way of the winning team. Like Nebraska and Michigan State really limited Michigan and Ohio State's possessions. The Nebraska-Ohio State game was much more surprising than the Michigan State game, by the way. Just want to clarify that because Ohio State's way better than Michigan. But still, Michigan's more talented than MSU. And MSU and Nebraska both did what you should do traditionally against more talented teams. You limit the amount of possessions they have, you keep their defense on the field forever, and you just grind it out. And it didn't work. It straight up didn't work. So Michigan and Ohio State came away with, well, wins, and to a certain degree a win is a win, but it also showed that, well, Michigan is still very limited. Michigan State just couldn't get out of their own way. And as for Nebraska versus Ohio State has some major concerns after that matchup that I talked about. Penn State here, they're not a perfect team. I'm not going to pretend that. They struggled to run the ball, again, like they did against USC, and they eventually pulled away against Wisconsin mainly because of creative play calling, the fact that Bo Pribula was forcing Wisconsin's defense, who was stacking the box and really daring Penn State to throw because there were wide open Penn State receivers pretty much all the time. They could no longer just focus on the running back. They had to account for the quarterback, and that opened up the ground game. But Penn State controlled this game in time of possession. The turnover battle was equal. They had more first downs, more total yards. They were much more successful through the air, much more successful on the ground to finish off the day. And they had the better third down efficiency. Their fourth down efficiency went Wisconsin's way. I think it was in part why this game was closer than, let's say, success rate would have advertised. And that was also the case with Michigan, Michigan State, and Ohio State, Nebraska. Like, Ohio State destroyed Nebraska in success rate, thanks to Parker Fleming. Stats-O-War on Twitter is his handle. But at the end of the day, success rate doesn't determine everything, because that just, well, depends on, did you win the play-by-play battle? And you can win the play-by-play battle, but if your opponent has that many more plays than you do, their margin for error is much wider. So, again, kudos to Nebraska, and also for Michigan State, even though they lost in a game that I picked them to win in, for, I think, doing a good job at controlling the pace of the game and coming up with a good strategy beforehand, before the game kicked off. As for Penn State here, I'm talking about those other performances because Penn State was different in the way that they controlled the game. And the game was only in doubt a little bit at half because of James Franklin's reputation as a head coach and, well, choking in games, whether big games or occasionally in the small games too. But that's not what this Penn State team is. This Penn State team is a second-half team, and you saw that when they came out and they outscored Wisconsin 21-3. They had a defensive touchdown. They held Wisconsin to around 3 yards per carry for much of the game, and Tawi Walker and that offensive line have had tremendous success this season. Penn State finished with a 0.23 points per play margin. Wisconsin at a negative 0.23 points per play margin. So the Nittany Lions controlled the Wisconsin Badgers here. Not much more to say about that. And again, the turnover margin was 0. Neither side won the turnover battle, just neutralized there. On third and fourth down, Penn State was a combined 8 of 15. Wisconsin was a combined 9 of 21 on third and fourth down. And when you look at penalties, Penn State 6 penalties for 41 yards, Wisconsin 5 penalties for 33 yards. So the penalty battle was pretty equal here. These teams, in terms of execution, had a similar game. Penn State had a special teams whiff early that led to the Wisconsin field goal to take the early lead. But really, outside of that, and then you look at the fumble that Drew Aller had on the 4th and inches, where Penn State looked like they were going to drive down and get a touchdown, but that was a bad, I don't know if it was a bad snap or Aller mishandled it because it was so close. You know, Aller being very close to the center, I'd blame it on Aller there, but that failed. And then the Braden Locke interception and some of the Wisconsin drops. But at this point, Wisconsin's drops and inaccurate passing are a part of their identity. They're never going to have an efficient passing offense this season, at least consistently. These teams played, I think, pretty close to not their ceiling exactly, at least in terms of Penn State. I think Wisconsin did in a variety of ways, but Penn State played, I think, in an above average performance relative to how they do. And I don't know if that's exactly a great thing, because we all know that Ohio State is a team that is near elite to elite. Oregon's the same way. Indiana is. There are teams around college football that are like Georgia or Texas. But I do think that with it being on the road in Camp Randall, Wisconsin is a much better team now than they were when they played Alabama. And Alabama plays a different style of football that I think matches up better with Wisconsin than Penn State, because Alabama has, really with Jalen Milroe, they have a lot more of a dynamic rushing offense. And you saw that in the second half with Penn State when they had Bo Pribula. They were all of a sudden able to move down the field easier and more methodically because, well, they could run the football. Wisconsin had to account for the quarterback run. They could no longer just focus on the running backs or the passing game. You had that third type of attack, the quarterback run. And of course, that makes things very different, because Kotelnicki can now run the offense that he ran at Kansas with Jalen Daniels and Jason Bean. Moving on to talk about Wisconsin, and then we'll talk about Penn State and the takeaways for them. I can see why Luke Fickell wants to change Wisconsin, why he wants to change their identity. And the reason for that is they put up 298 total yards, and they only got 13 points out of it. They had 81 rushing yards for 3 yards per carry, and they only had 25 minutes and 29 seconds of possession. They threw the ball 42 times. They only had 27 carries, but a lot of those passing attempts, well, it came later in the game when they couldn't run the ball. They couldn't. And they tried early on to establish that identity on the ground, and they had some success in the first half. But outside of that, they did not have much success. Ultimately, unless you have Jonathan Taylor, who was close to a greatest of all time back in college, unless you have that type of running back, or you have one of the best offensive lines or the best offensive line in the country, and you have a respectable passing offense to keep defenses honest, you are not going to win games by pounding the rock over and over and over and over again. You're not going to do it unless you have a few things that go your way. So for Wisconsin, as an example, Michigan and Georgia, well, they could pound the rock and have an elite offensive line, and that helped them win a national title. But they also had passing offenses that would punish you if all you did was stack the box and dare them to throw. Wisconsin doesn't have that. And you can say the same with Ohio State in 2019. Awesome offensive line, awesome running back in J.K. Dobbins, a mobile QB in Justin Fields, but a passing offense that would punish you if you tried to totally shut down their rushing offense and go all in stopping the run. They would punish you there. Wisconsin doesn't have that. Braden Locke is a statue, and that type of quarterback does not sit well with modern college football. Wisconsin does not have a generationally talented running back, and their offensive line, while I think one of the best in the Big Ten and maybe one of the best in the country, I don't think is the best. And Penn State's defense is very, very good. Wisconsin could have won this game if they had slightly better receivers and a moderately better quarterback. They could have won this game. And then we'd be talking about Wisconsin being in the top 25. Is Penn State a real team or are they not? Then again, if Wisconsin had the things I just described, they maybe would have beaten USC as well and held on to that halftime lead. So maybe we'd be talking about Wisconsin as a college football playoff contender that just lost to a much more talented Alabama team in a closer game in week 3. So I hope what I'm saying here makes sense in that you get better athletes in the passing game for Wisconsin, and this team is right there. They're seriously right there. They're a few players away from being great, from being a team that can compete for a college football playoff spot, or who can go toe-to-toe with some of these higher-end teams who recruit better, and Wisconsin can punch above their weight class. They're not that far away. Through the air, they were 22 of 42 for 217 yards. They averaged 5.2 yards per attempt, 9.9 yards per completion, no passing touchdowns, Braden Locke did have an interception that went for 6. He had a 54.2 QBR, and just a good quarterback plus better and healthier receivers. I mean, Will Pauling is good. Vinny Anthony II is good. CJ Williams is good. A lot of these players are good, but I'm talking about a step above good. And I don't think Will Pauling is totally healthy either. So adding more depth and upside at wide receiver and tight end, but especially quarterback, would help this team a lot. Would do a lot of good for this team. They're not that far away. Luke Fickell is one of the better head coaches in the country. He is. And I've come to a belief where I think Paul Chryst wrecked Wisconsin more than a lot of people think. Because that 2022 team, in truth, was a bad football team. I mean, remember, they finished 6-6, and they barely beat a damaged and distraught Oklahoma State team in their bowl game to go 7-6. They were not a good team. Their defenses were worse than Wisconsin's defense of this year or last year, and those defenses under Mike Tressel have arguably been functional more so because of Mike Tressel rather than because of their players, if you get what I'm saying. So this team still has a long way to go. They do. But they're also at the same time very close. Oh, so close, and yet oh, so far. And I think in a game like this, they could have pulled off the upset if they had a better quarterback, if they had better wide receivers, because then you don't throw the pick six. You don't give Penn State that massive jolt of momentum. They probably still figure some things out because it's Andy Kotelnicki, and they're a very good team with a good coaching staff. But maybe you just keep ahead. Keep ahead by one score and force Penn State to play catch-up. And then Wisconsin pulls off an upset win. That's how close I think the Wisconsin Badgers are. And their offensive line against Penn State, they didn't allow a single sack. They did allow 5 TFLs. I thought Penn State's defensive tackles in particular did a very good job of stepping up. But Wisconsin, they're strong at tackle. They are one of the best offensive lines in the country when it comes to pass protection. They have one of the best offensive tackle duos in the country. They do, with, I believe, Jack Nelson and Riley Malmon at tackle. And you also got players like, you got Joe Huber, you got their center, and maybe I'm misreading some of these names or bringing up Wisconsin offensive linemen from maybe last year. I'm just saying this off the top of my head. But their tackles are very, very good. I mean, there's a reason why they allowed no sacks, and Braden Locke, for the most part, had time to throw. He also got the ball off quickly, but 42 attempts, no sacks allowed. They have the trench play. They're injured at running back, but still doing modestly well there. If they just had better skill position players and more depth all around, we'd be talking about this team in a different way. And I think that whether it's next year or maybe the year after that, I think sooner rather than later, Wisconsin is going to be being back to being a consistent top 25, if not maybe consistent top 15 team under Luke Fickell. I think that he's an elite head coach, and I think he has an awesome staff. Phil Longo and Mike Tressel called great games. There were several drops from the wide receivers that I think negated great calls. There were miscues from Braden Locke or from the offensive line going up against Penn State's defense, and credit to Tom Allen and credit to Andy Kotelnicki for doing their job and calling great games themselves. It was a masterful coaching battle. At the end of the day, though, the coaching staffs really kind of canceled each other out, and at that point, you look at the players, you look at the depth, and Penn State's better at virtually every position, compared to Wisconsin, outside of, I would say, offensive tackle. That's it. And maybe special teams, depending on the day, because Penn State recently has found a reliable kicker in Ryan Barker. But the Nittany Lions have better depth, and especially that's the case at quarterback, wide receiver, at running back, the skill positions. Then on defense, their defensive line is way better than Wisconsin's defensive line. And Wisconsin's defensive line and their front has stepped up in recent weeks. They did a respectable job against Penn State, but at the end of the day, depth matters. Penn State has one of their best offensive lines in the entire James Franklin era, particularly when it comes to running the football, and they came through. That's what happened. Penn State's depth and their talent came through and won them this game. And also the coaches did too, but to circle back, Wisconsin's coaching staff did a good job, so I don't think it's exactly fair to say that if Wisconsin coached better, they would have won this game. I don't think they could have coached better than they did. They just need the better players, as I've said now time and time again. Let's talk about Penn State here. The Nittany Lions, I have some concerns about them, and one of them is their slow starts. Did you know that they only score 3.4 first quarter points per game? And they're 102nd in that category. And they are 101st in first quarter time of possession share. Ouch. Outside the top 100 in basically first quarter game control and first quarter points scored. Very important things to win a football game. Now, outside of that, when you look at the second quarter, when you look at the second half, they're one of the best teams in the country. And if they could start the game like they start the third quarter, they would be viewed, I think, unanimously as a top 4, top 3, maybe even top 2 power-rated team, because they're a very good second-half team. And they're also pretty good and typically get a lot of juice and energy going and great execution. And they call a great game in the second quarter as well, get momentum entering half, come out of half with even more momentum. And at that point, they're a high-functioning machine, a well-oiled machine. But in the first quarter, for example, Wisconsin, they got a field goal first. Penn State marched down 9 plays, 54 yards. They got to the Wisconsin 28 on a 4th and inches. They got to the Wisconsin 28. And at that point, I thought to myself that, okay, they're actually going to score a touchdown in the first quarter. They are not going to necessarily start quickly, but they're going to dictate the pace of the game. They're going to stay ahead of Wisconsin, not give them any momentum, and this is going to be a business trip, like I thought it was going to be. My score prediction, by the way, was Penn State 34, Wisconsin 17. At the end of the day, I was pretty close to that because I picked Penn State to cover the spread, win by double digits, and really control Wisconsin, and they did, but it took them longer to do so than I would have anticipated, and longer to do so than I think a lot of Penn State fans would have liked. I know that no Penn State fan was comfortable being down 7-10 at the half. And what happened was Drew Aller, well, he quarterback sneaked it, but fumbled and got stopped short. I think actually Wisconsin even recovered the fumble. Didn't matter. They got stopped cold, and Wisconsin had momentum. And from that point, the crowd was really into the game until later in the fourth quarter when Penn State outscored Wisconsin 14-0. So these slow starts, they're concerning. And maybe Penn State can get away with it for the whole season. And I say maybe because Ohio State's not exactly invincible, and everyone else on Penn State's schedule is going to be probably a double-digit underdog to the Nittany Lions. So maybe for the rest of the regular season, they can get away with that. I mean, Michigan in 2022, for example, a team who I've compared to this Penn State team before. They're different in a lot of ways, but one area where they are similar is their insane second half adjustments and how differently they play in the first half compared to the second half. Michigan went 12-0, in fact 13-0, winning the Big Ten undefeated, making those second half adjustments and starting off slow. Like Penn State, they had a pretty easy schedule that year. The only teams they faced who finished in the top 10 in the regular season and in the Big Ten championship game were Ohio State on the road and Penn State at home. And Penn State at home, well, we know that James Franklin struggles in the big house, and Michigan had a massive matchup advantage on them. And they played Ohio State competitively in Beaver Stadium after having a slow start, and that game was potentially theirs to win in the fourth quarter. They just, well, couldn't finish, and Ohio State was the much better team that year. So maybe Penn State can, maybe they can get away with it, but you don't want to play that game. Because what happened with 2022 Michigan eventually is they came up against TCU. And a few mistakes here and there, TCU figuring out Michigan's defense and having the explosivity that they did and having the brilliant plan that they did. Well, Michigan started off slow, and they beat TCU in the second half, but TCU won the first half and built enough of a lead to where they could lose to Michigan in the second half and still overall win the game and execute at a higher level. So take from that what you will. These slow starts are definitely concerning. And what Penn State has to hope for this coming Saturday against Ohio State is that they can stay within striking distance for the first quarter and really for the first half, because they're a phenomenal second half team. I think that they are the best second half team in the country. They make some of the best, if not the best, second half adjustments in all of college football. They are that good. But what Michigan did against Ohio State in 2022 is they stayed within striking distance. They were down by less than a touchdown at the half, then they took over in the second half against the Buckeyes. Penn State needs to do something like that if they're not going to start fast in the game against Ohio State or in the next couple weeks against their opponents. Is they need to play good defense, really, is what I'm saying right there. And speaking of that, they do have elite depth. They put up 419 total yards. They put up 256 passing yards, 173 rushing yards. They had 5 players with more than 50 yards contributing. They had 5 tackles for loss on defense. They had a pick 6. They were winning the battle on the line of scrimmage against Wisconsin on both sides of the football, which is pretty impressive. They had 4 passes defended. And it was just overall, it was a good effort. It showed that they had depth because Anthony Dunco, Drew Aller, and, well, they went down and they were injured. Denai Dennis Sutton went down and was injured. And Penn State, it was clear to me at least that while they weren't overlooking Wisconsin, they weren't looking ahead to Ohio State, they were conscious of that Ohio State game. I don't think that Drew Aller is not benched, that's the wrong term. But I don't think he sits if this is a game against Ohio State. I don't. Because he came out of half and he was actually throwing the football before the coaches talked to him and, well, they sat him down. And I don't imagine that many of the players that Penn State sit if this is a bigger game. Because you would rather lose against Wisconsin but beat Ohio State or try to beat them at full strength than win this game but lose to the Buckeyes because you're not at full strength at a variety of positions. Because an 11-1 Penn State with a loss to Wisconsin has a much better chance of reaching Indianapolis or getting a higher seed because of their high-quality win compared to an 11-1 Penn State who lost to Ohio State and really lost to the only great team or near elite or elite team they've played all regular season. This is a team that has a lot of depth, and that depth showed out. And I'm going to say something that might be a little controversial, but I think that Beau Pribula, who's 11 of 13 for 98 yards, 7.5 yards per attempt, and a touchdown, I think that he can run this offense just fine. I think that Penn State has tremendous depth at the quarterback position. And I'm not saying that Pribula is as good as Aller. I think that Aller is much better than Pribula. But what Pribula has that Aller does not is true dual threat mobility. And that fits Andy Kotelnicki's offense way better. The Cover 3 podcast was discussing this. Pribula kept Wisconsin's defense honest in the rushing attack and opened up the rushing attack. And he had an 85 QBR on the day, 28 rushing yards, a passing touchdown. He was making some very impressive throws into tight windows. I think that Penn State can trust him in tough spots. I think they can trust him to win games for him. And I wouldn't be shocked that if moving forward he's involved in the offense more, because he really, really opens up the offense. It's in a similar way to Cade McNamara versus J.J. McCarthy in 2021. Although I do think, again, Aller is the more talented quarterback. He is the better quarterback for Penn State than Pribula is, and will be for the future. Whereas in 21, J.J. McCarthy was the quarterback of the future. Cade McNamara was known and assumed for a lot of people that he was just the quarterback for then and not necessarily moving forward. So different in a lot of ways, but also similar, as I think this Penn State team is to the previous Michigan teams. There are a plethora of differences, but there are enough similarities that you can draw things from that. And I think that what they have in that quarterback room is unique, and it's a little exceptional, because typically when you have two quarterbacks, the saying goes you have none. Well, that's not the case here. I think Aller is a top 10 quarterback nationally. When healthy, he makes good decisions. He's much more accurate, has a strong arm. He's more elusive and aware in the pocket than he was last year. He's a really good quarterback. He could be the best quarterback in the Big Ten. But Pribula brings an element to the game that Aller doesn't have. And Kotelnicki, I think, is a genius offensive coordinator, and I think that Pribula's performance shows that. The fact that backup quarterback, who was a 3-star out of high school, whose best offer was from Penn State, I think mainly because he was and I don't know about this exactly, but I'm assuming it's because he was a Pennsylvania kid, Pribula was. His other offers were from Nebraska, Syracuse, Rutgers, I think Northwestern, if I remember correctly, to name a few. Like Penn State by far was his best offer. That quarterback, Bo Pribula, he's been developed phenomenally, and he fits this offense very well. And I just think that whether it's him or whether it's Aller, this Penn State offense is going to find a way to score mid to upper 20s, lower 30s every game. Every game, no matter what. I think you can count on that happening. And last but not least for Penn State, my MVP for the game is quarterback Bo Pribula. 126 total yards, a touchdown, 19 total plays. He had an 85 quarterback efficiency rating. It was just overall had an awesome performance. He led Penn State to 14 offensive points, 2 drives down the field. One was 13 plays, 81 yards, 7 minutes, 35 seconds. Another was 9 plays, 76 yards, 5 minutes, and 15 seconds. Brilliant drives. And it's a credit to Andy Kotelnicki and also to Bo Pribula. Didn't put the ball in harm's way, was, I think, very methodical and patient. And he also showed that he can securely handle the football, because there were several plays where he got hit hard. The ball never came out of his hands. And he threw into some tight windows, but they were only where his receivers could get the football, only where they could catch the football. So an impressive performance from Bo Pribula. I think that, well, if this is the year where Penn State beats Ohio State, and that's a big if, because they haven't, and Ohio State's favored, and quite honestly, they should be favored. If this is the year, I got to be honest and say I don't know if Drew Aller being hurt is going to change that, with how Bo Pribula played and with the type of coordinator Kotelnicki is, and also how Pribula fits the offense, because Penn State's rushing offense is one of the best in the Big Ten. It's one of the best in the nation, and putting a dual threat quarterback who has now proven that he can throw but can also run and has underrated speed behind that O-line and with those running backs, that's going to be hell for any defensive coordinator. So good win for Penn State. It was also a good effort by Wisconsin. I know moral victories really don't exist, but I think Wisconsin's very close to being a competitor and a player in the Big Ten. Thank you all so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Rascal, and Connor Little OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, Tyler Nye for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, Will Loftus for being all-conference members. Have a great day, everyone. Please check out my merchandise store, Patreon page, and Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Go Badgers, and go Nittany Lions.